Pa-pa-ra-bam. Week 3. Theory. Theory of week 3. What does it mean? What are you talking about? This is about Theory 3, the Aristotle's Poetics. So far we dealt with Plato. To be more specific, it was Plato's account of Socrates. So therefore we start dealing with the Socratics. Socrates, student of Socrates, Plato, student of Plato, Aristotle. So we're moving now from Plato to Aristotle. We're still in transitioning. You will feel it today. When we talk about Aristotle, we recognize some stuff we talked about Plato. So find the reading. Find the reading where? Find the reading below this video, below here. Find the reading. Read this reading. Read it. And when you have read it, come back. And so it's a book. So the Poetics, Aristotle wrote a book, Poetics, super short. You will have read it after it takes 1 hour, 1.5 hours, you know. The first two section, I would say it stops being very interesting after 1460 sections. There is a section numbering. After 1460, I would say it stops being so super relevant. Before that, you have good stuff, amazing stuff. So please read it and then come back and we go through the main points. Okay, back now. Okay, so back on means we go to tapadapam, tapadam, patapahatapatam, tapam, tapam, bam, harampapam. Yeah, that's not that. So Poetics, Aristotle. The Socratics, and Aristotle is one of those, a late Socratic. Ancient Greek. If you talk English, you want to talk about theory. You want to talk about the theory about storytelling, about narration, then you gotta talk about the Greeks. You know, if you don't speak in English, you may have other resources, other references for doing so. But if you speak in English about the theory about storytelling, you gotta look at those Greeks. Why? Because theory is a Greek word. If you speak another language, if you have another word for theory in there, and it has its roots not in ancient Greek, by all means. But if you speak English, it gotta be Greek, ancient Greek. Good. So, Aristotle Poetics. The Poetics. Poetics. Tick. Adjective. Okay, so you may translate Aristotle's Poetics as Aristotle on the poetical. Okay, so we talked about Plato on poetry. Now we talk Aristotle on poetry. And right on the first page, on the first paragraph, you will recognize some stuff. And Aristotle talks, when Aristotle talks about story in here, he talks about a myth that is myth coming from ancient Greek mythos. And there's mythos, epos, and logos. These are all different words for the word. There's the mythic word, the epic word, and the logical word. Okay? So, and in myth still lives in there when we say, you're telling me a myth, you're telling me a story. And it has this tint Plato gave it, Plato Socrates gave it. It's that of mythos mimics. And with Plato, you remember, this is a copying of a copying of a copying. Because it copies, it's not the original. Therefore, it's removed from truth. Therefore, we kick out all the artists, the poets, from an ideal state. Also, Aristotle says mythos is mimesis. Mythos, the story, is an imitation, a representation, a mimicking, depending how you want to translate it, okay? And all we really need to go about understand is the differences, the different ways, the differences of how stories imitate. And from that, if they imitate better than the original, you have a tragedy. If they imitate worse, you have comedy. And equal, it doesn't say what it is, but we would say it's a documentary. If it tries to be like reality, it is a documentary. Okay, let's go with that. He doesn't go into that. And really, what he focuses in the Poetics is tragedy. He thinks it's implicitly by his selection. He proposes it to be something to look at. Let's say that. Something also like important. You remember, Poetics, poiein, comes from doing. Also techne, we talked about, comes from doing. Also drama, drama comes from dran, means also doing. Okay, so these are just the dramatist does, the poet does, the technician does, but all these do with a particular flavor to it, yeah. And all those main theorists gave those words particular flavors. Okay, so why is Aristotle able to talk about myths and mimesis in a way, in a good way? And this is why he basically right at the beginning he says that the Poetics, the underlying urge to imitate is innate, is inborn to human children. It's fundamental, if you want to use another word for it. It's ingrown in us. So children, human children, learn through imitation. Copy. You want to learn piano playing, language playing. It's all a game of imitating, mimicking. So that's basically how he justifies going into that. And because it's how they learn, you can use it to educate. An educational objective that he proposes, you know. So then he goes into, he repeats it in different shades. Tragedy as a mimicking praxis. Okay, so as it mimics, a tragedy mimics doing, praxis. Praxis is action, doing stuff. And tragedy is a particular kind of poetry that is about mimicking praxis in a particular way. Those ways are, it gotta be earnest, it gotta be complete, it gotta be majestic. These three things. You can, like earnest means like proper. I mean, this is serious. It gotta be complete. There gotta be an ending to it. It gotta be majestic. It gotta be of a certain magnitude. You know, this is some stuff, proper, impactful, big things. Then, okay, so that's what he says. You know, there's some ways of he trying to articulate how you need to go about mimicking actions in order to have a specific worthwhile effect that you can maybe amplify the educational aspect. But on top of that, he says something very interesting that he is very shortly mentioned. Catharsis, it has a cathartic effect. So by acting people acting through pity and fear, it brings about a catharsis for these experiences. Catharsis you can translate as a cleansing or purification, a release. So by deploying pity, the feeling of pity for a character in a story, by deploying the feeling of fear, the fear for a character, that you have a release of emotion that has a positive, possibly healing effect. That's a really radical purging, cleaning, cleansing effect. This maybe as you can relate to it. It's maybe sounds a little bit similar to exposure therapy. We go later into pity and fear. Okay, cathartic effect through pity and fear. We go later into an example of that. Okay, so here 1958. I think that's where he really states that mythos is a mimicking of praxis. And if you go with that understanding, it means, well, you know, if story is basically a representation, an imitation, a mimicking of doing, that means that it's composed, a synthesis that is a collection of events. If it's about doing stuff, doing things, you do it in that, and then that, and then that, and then you have a series of events. So all you gotta do is thinking about how you structure those events, and then you should have a good myth, a good story. Or a better translation is with Aristotle, he thinks more about that as plot. And so another term that I find very fascinating, you know, that so how are those actions portrayed? They are through the means of people playing those actions. Okay, so the people, the characters are for the events to take place, not the opposite way. It's not character driven, it's action driven, it's happening driven. Things are happening, events take place. In order for them to be, they are not narrated. It's not like Jack is doing whatever. No, you see Jack doing something. Those characters are there to perform certain actions. Okay, so there's a difference between a tragedy and an epic. So one of those different dimensions. It's not a narration. You can see people acting, doing stuff. Okay, so another thing, if you go about that, if you see that, you know, you will have psychagogy. You know the word pedagogy? It's psyche, the soul, and agogy. There's like agenda or leading. It's a direction of the soul. In modern Greek, it's translated as entertainment. So when you watch Star Wars, when you watch a movie, your soul is directed. So your soul traveling the cosmos, okay? That's a very interesting way of understanding. This is entertainment. This is ultimately that the journey, the transformation, what's happening, it's a plot that your soul buys into and it's followed into that. It's just a side note. It's my particular reading of that. I think that's a very good way of the direction of the soul. Okay, so the character enacts actions, and the character reveals themselves through showing, through exerting choice. So by them doing this rather than that, they will reveal the character. So that's one big point. Another thing is, those plot gotta be whole. It gotta be of a certain magnitude. Whole means, and this is the three-part structure. It gotta have a start. A start is with nothing before it. It gotta have an end. End is with nothing after that. And it gotta have a middle, which is between start and end. This is 3 act. 1, 2, 3. He says this. In order for that, it feels whole, and it needs to be of a certain magnitude. And magnitude means, he goes also into that, this idea of wholeness, that it needs to be, so magnitude is that in memory you can capture the whole. So it's not, it's big enough, so it has a certain size to it, a certain scale, a certain dimension, but it's not too big so you lose track of what's happening. So you can capture the magnitude of it with one grasp in your memory. Okay, so then he goes also into what whole means. It needs to be one, has to be of unity. So meaning if there are parts, events, aspects to it, to the story that you can leave out, those are not essential, and therefore they harm the unity. All those elements there should be. Without 3, this is not a shape. Without 2, 1 and 3 is not a shape. Okay, So I cannot leave any parts of this out and still have the unity of a triangle. If I add another point, the other point is redundant for this to be a triangle, okay? So it needs to have obey a sort of unity of essential characteristics. Yeah. 3 other things that need to be somehow in there. A reversal, that is a turning point. You can also translate it peripepteia. A recognition, that is a change, a shift from ignorance to knowledge, and some sort of suffering, pathos. It connects with pity and fear feeling. Okay, so these are the ingredients. Then other ingredients for the character. The character is in Greek ethos, ethics. Character should have a certain ethics, with a sloppy word translation, but it's still a good one. And these should be good, charismatic. They should be harmonic or appropriate. Appropriate is like if it's about astronauts, you put characters that fit in the environment of space travel, for example. They should fit into the story. They should be alike. I would say relatable, also good translation of that. And that they should be consistent. So whatever your character, whatever the character is, it should have a consistent character. Aristotle also says that if it's not a consistent character, it should be consistently inconsistent. So the character should be in character. The character shouldn't change character. Otherwise, we will not be able to perceive the character as character if the character shapeshifts. Okay, so this is the basic elements. Other than that, he goes into examples of classic theater, ancient Greek theater plays, scripts, and I think it's not certain meters, some melodies, chorus, those structural things. I don't think they're not really applicable. They are historically interesting, but not really for our matters. And so basically until 1460, this is interesting stuff, and let's try to apply it on what we dealt with so far. Let's see. So remember the cave. The cave is sitting people in there. Behind them, artificial lights, throwing phenomena, shadow copies of reality on the wall. They're buying into that, believing those shadows are the real objects, but they aren't. They happen to be the escape of one slave. Escape, not really, but this character goes out. At once, this character steps out into the open. The character is illuminated by the sun, and it comes to an understanding of, this is it. Okay, this is, in the light of the truth, comes to be what objects really are, what the world really is, and the past was mere. So let's look through what we just talked with Aristotle through this. You have one element, the start. Here. Then, this big threshold, the climax, where the character steps out of the cave, hit by light. There's a threshold, goes through the door. It's an intense feeling of pain because of the sunrise, never saw light before. And then settling into the realization what that means. Okay, so you have 1, 2, 3 points that we can close, and we have this triangle. Those 3 big events: the start, the exposition, if you call it technically, the conflict, the pinnacle, the climax. Boy, that's when it hits. Literally, this is when it hit. And then the coming to terms to that, the resolution of that, and in this case, it closes. At the end, the character goes back, changed. Yeah, and there's some discussion we can have on that. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 have in there. Then we have has a certain wholeness to this tale. Okay, it has a certain magnitude. Magnitude is what does it mean to be human and perceive the world and trust in your senses, etc. Then you have a reversal. This climax, there is a turning point, a twist that hitting those sunrise. Then the plot twist is I didn't realize that so far I lived my life in delusion. I lived a lie. I lived in the dark. And now in the light of the truth, I can see. So there's a twist that comes in there. Also there is a recognition. From ignorance, darkness, the unconscious, to consciousness, to light, to knowledge. So from ignorance to knowledge, from agnosticism to gnosticism, to darkness, obscurity, to clarity, to light, to from fake light to real light. Recognition. There's a suffering. This is a very intense, painful happening point in the story. Then we have cathartic effect. We have pity for those slaves. We fear for this main character that gets dragged out. What happened? And then one warden grabs one slave and drags them up. What's going to happen? So in all these things you can find those elements in the story. And you can, from light, darkness up here. Okay, so these are very influential and very important. Big Hollywood movies deploy those tricks. The really idea becomes a very technical understanding of what can we do to go about imitating. So technology is all about how can we go about imitating. Which techniques, strategies do we need to deploy to capture reality so we can simulate it in the best ways. Okay, it comes very technical from Aristotle onwards. He initiates that understanding. Okay, so anything to put here? Yeah, and you can think of that as a direction of the soul. No, let's leave it. Okay. Okay, this is Aristotle Poetics. Very highly hardcore stuff. Short reads, 1 hour. Good portion of the book done. I think it's the longest text we deal with here, and it's highly. So think about how it relates to your practice. The structure, your characters, events, emotional, suffering, pity, fear, emotional release, purge, healing, educational, imitative, going about characters, a feeling of wholeness, that there's a consistency, a wholeness in your work. Okay, so these are cool things to think about. We will use that moving on forward in other. We will move towards the hero's journey, and we can recycle a lot of thinking that we have from Plato, a lot of thinking that we have in Aristotle. Even though it looks short, these are like maybe 12 points, really like 2 radical things. Aristotle thinking about mimesis, there's a point to mimesis. It's this idea that it's how we learn, how we can use it for educational purposes, how we can go about release, purification, cathartic things, ritualistic things that can be enacted with entertainment, and the idea of what an artwork needs to have in order to be considered to be an artwork, start, middle, end, and so on. So thank you for your time, for your attention. I hope you were able to get something out of it. This is an offering for you. Okay, so you maybe say we will move forward and we will see that. I'm not saying that Aristotle nailed it. I'm not saying this is correct. This is now becomes more interesting now. We actually move forward and we read some stuff where people strongly disagree. Bertolt Brecht strongly disagrees with Aristotle, and this will be very fruitful for us because we now know Aristotle, we know Plato, now Aristotle, to have to understand this clash and what it means conceptual and theoretical, and hopefully you can see how it enriches your practice. Okay, so again, thank you for your time and energy, and hopefully seeing that show up maybe in your research documents, informing practice maybe somehow. Okay. Oh, I forgot something. I forgot my slide. No, where's the slide? What the slide? Aristotle Poetics. We did that already. All right, good. Again, thank you and see you.